The bad dreams I had been having since soon after the Falklands had ended were getting worse. I hadn't thought too much of them at the time. They were just nightmares. The odd one stood out. One night in Northern Ireland, I dreamed I was being strangled and spat all over Taff, who was in the bunk below me. I was lucky he did not put me into a permanent coma. Perhaps I should have asked to see the medics, though even if I had, I don't think they would have listened. But it's all academic. Partly I did not realize I had serious problems. Partly it is just not the sort of thing serving soldiers like to talk about. You don't want to show any weaknesses because it can be a merciless environment, although I suppose I could have stood up to the piss-taking. It was not like I was a coward or somebody who was trying to work his ticket. I had volunteered for an operational tour of duty in Northern Ireland, after all, though some would say that was proof that I was crazy. Perhaps the army should have picked up on those early signs. Still, it is challenging to spot irrational behavior in soldiers because they often get into fights, behave aggressively, and generally act oddly. Anyway, I had just blotted the nightmares out with heavy drinking and got on with life. I had hoped they would go away in time, particularly after I left the service, but that wasn't happening. As I headed to the factory, I pushed it all to the back of my mind. This was something I was able to do at the time, on an even keel, earning a reasonable wage, with a steady girlfriend to keep me on the straight and narrow and living back home among my old friends and family. I was coping. The work at Cellophane was a really positive factor, too. We worked as a small team of 7, which reminded me of soldiering in the Falklands or Ireland. There was good banter and camaraderie between us, and the future looked okay. The job lasted for over 2 years. Then, one day, early in December of 1991, the suits in London made us all redundant and closed the factory down. On the last night, we all brought in beer and had a party. I was very sad saying goodbye to my mates. We all said we'd keep in touch, but apart from one lad, I never see any of them now. I would have continued to cope okay if the factory hadn't closed down. Without that regular work and the feeling of security it brought, I began to disintegrate. I felt really low, that I was a failure, even though it wasn't my fault that the place had shut. I had just bought a house and was planning to marry Julie and start a family. This looked a long way off now. My mind was full of negative thoughts, and they started getting stronger and stronger. As I sank lower and lower, the old Falklands nightmares really started in earnest, taking a frightening grip on me. I couldn't sleep properly, and the odd snatches I got were plagued with strange dreams of death and horror. Argentinian planes flown by dead men, and the body of the enemy soldier in Stanley came half back to life and looking at me accusingly. I thought a lot about the Sir Galahad and would find myself in tears wondering why the rapier hadn't fired, feeling a mountain of guilt on my shoulders for all those deaths and the awful injuries of many of the survivors. I was only out of work for a week or two just before Christmas. I got an interview for a security job, took my army references with me and tried to give a good impression. One of the interviewers was an ex-RMP. It went well, and I got the job. It was good money, too, though I soon discovered the reason why. The average bloke wouldn't suffer the conditions we had to work under for anything less. We were contracted to work at a local factory that produced a variety of tissue products. In the old days, they had 3 men manning their gatehouse, but cost-cutting meant it was now left to 1 man, and quite often that was me. After the first couple of days, I didn't want to go back. It was just impossible to do the job correctly on my own. 2 telephones were constantly ringing, one internal, one external, and I grew to hate the pat little greeting you were made to give. Good morning, thank you for calling. How may I help you? While you're stuck on the phone dealing with someone upstairs, or giving some trucker directions from the motorway. Visitors would enter the gatehouse and expect to be dealt with straight away. Meanwhile, every wagon, hundreds a day, had to be booked in and booked out. You were required physically to check a seal on the back doors of the outgoing vehicles. Contractors coming on site had to be booked in and the insides of their vehicles checked. Eventually, you had a line of lorries like something out of the movie Convoy waiting to come in, engines revving, air brakes going off, and horns sounding, another line waiting to get out, and 15 or 20 assorted people milling around in the tiny gatehouse asking stupid questions and getting in your way. It was bedlam, a chaotic, nightmarish farce. One thing I had learned as a soldier was to have pride in my job. That was impossible here. Actual security was virtually non-existent, and I tried to make this point to the management, but I got nowhere. It was all about money. Proper security costs, pound notes, and lots of them, and they didn't want to hear that. Opinions were dangerous things, and voicing one saw you classed as a troublemaker. Your name would end up in the supervisor's little black book, which meant you were on your way out. I would get home, head throbbing, eat my tea, then have to iron a clean white shirt for the morning. As I didn't trust Julie with an iron, we'd end up having a blazing row. I would crawl to bed, fall into a coma, and have several night terrors before getting up at 5 in the morning and doing it all again, bleary-eyed and utterly knackered. After a few weeks of this, I couldn't cope with work. I hated it. I would fantasize about answering the phone, good morning and fuck off, before walking out at the busiest time of day, giving all the wagons the V sign and heading to the nearest pub to get slaughtered. But I didn't have the guts to turn my fantasy into reality. so I soldiered on. Security work always attracts ex-squaddies, and having people to talk to about my Falklands experiences helped keep me from sliding into total insanity. I had spent meal breaks chatting with a lad called Taff, who was actually English but had been named Maldwin by his Welsh dad. Taff was ex-Army Catering Corps and had served in Northern Ireland during Operation Motorman in the early 70s, in the mad bad old days when IRA gunmen would stand openly in the street and have cowboy-style shootouts. With the security forces, another lad with whom I got along well was a guy called Dave. He was an ex-infantry soldier, and someone who would go on to play quite a significant part in my life. Although I had quickly realized that it was impossible to do the job properly, I had to turn up and go through the motions. Julie and I were getting married in November 1993, so I just had to hack it. It wasn't just about me anymore. If it had have been, I would probably have been in Bosnia, or the French Foreign Legion, or anywhere else but that bloody factory. We got married and honeymooned in Florida. We enjoyed Disney World, saw all the other sights, and visited my auntie, who lived out there, and generally had a nice couple of weeks. But my head was nowhere near right. I was edgy and tense the whole time, though I tried not to show it, and starting to get paranoid. It was, I think, a combination of drinking, sleep deprivation. Every night now I would wake up sweating, caught in a night terror, or dreaming about the Sir Galahad, and depression. Our hotel was in a fairly rough area off the beaten tourist track, and several people had been murdered within a 5-minute drive of the place in the recent past. Gradually I began to expect trouble. Everyone who looked my way, that guy on his mobile phone, the gang of youths across the street, the kid who just dodged round that corner, they were all out to rob us and shoot us. It was as if I was back in Ireland, but this time I was unarmed. The feelings of being threatened grew until I became convinced that I was going to be shot. During our time in Florida, Julie started throwing up fairly regularly. I thought she had caught some sort of bug, but women know, somehow. She bought a pregnancy test kit, and bingo, sitting outside our hotel in 80-degree sunshine, we had suddenly and dramatically become a family. It was a pleasant surprise. We'd not really been trying for kids, but we soon came round to the idea, though Dave spoiled things a bit when he rang my hotel room from work in England to tell me that I'd been put on a new shift with a couple of blokes I didn't tee, much like it was obvious to me that they were trying to winkle me out of the place. They didn't have to worry. Dave was going to get rid of both of us for them. Back home, my nightmares were coming thick and fast now, with a stressful job and hardly any sleep, combining and feeding off each other in a vicious circle. It did not help that I was drinking heavily, 7 or 8 pints a night, with spirits chasers, and that I was worrying myself sick about providing for a new baby. One night I woke up to find myself loudly screaming at Julie in the middle of a crazy nightmare. I was mortified, and she was terrified, more that I might hurt the baby than anything. A few days after that, Julie developed anemia during the pregnancy and had to go to the hospital, which left me on my own at home. I found myself rattling around the house with time on my hands, which, in my deteriorating mental state, was a bad situation in which to be. My shift pattern had been changed, and I was on my days off at the same time as Dave. So, one night, January 6, 1994, as it happens, I went round to his house with a pack of beer, a bottle of Southern Comfort, and a couple of violent gangster and war films. When I got there, his wife and 2 kids went to bed, and we settled down for a quiet evening of Hollywood blood and gore. To be continued. If you are enjoying this, please like and subscribe, and consider reading Still Watching Men Burn: Fighting the PTSD War by A.A. McNally.